Ciota, the Technology and Web Services Librarian at the William A. Wise Law Library at the University of Colorado Law School. Today I'll be talking about bias in computing systems and some of the surrounding legal implications as part of the Center for Research, Data, and Digital Scholarship series on data technology and the law. Let's get started. The format of this presentation will pretty much be explaining the types of biases that can occur in electronic technology, and then we'll look at an example and then either look at a legal case, a related law or regulation, or potential future legal implications. And for the YouTube portion, that'll be broken up into separate chunks for viewability because the presentation was a lot longer. So first, we'll start with where I got my definitions for the biases in computing systems. There is a Germinal 1996 article by information scientists Batya Friedman and Helen Niesenbaum, which details the type of biases that can be present in hardware, software, and firmware. The biases they looked at, and the ones we'll be looking at in these presentations, are ones where computer systems systematically and unfairly discriminate against certain individuals or groups of individuals in favor of others. Friedman and Niesenbaum postulated 3 categories of biases, each with their own subcategories. The main categories are pre-existing bias, technical bias, and emergent bias. We'll get into those during this presentation. The first type of bias in computing systems is pre-existing bias, which is a bias that existed prior to the creation of the system and can enter the system consciously or unconsciously. The pre-existing bias category is further broken down into 2 subcategories. An individual bias originates from an individual who has a significant impact on the design of the system. This might be a client who has very strong opinions about giving preference to hiring candidates who live within a 50-mile radius of the office, and so has the software vendor create a system that brings closer candidates to the top of the page when presented. A societal bias originates from larger institutions. This might be the law, or an industry, or a culture. An example of this might be an educational software that was unconsciously given the cultural assumption that boys like mathematics and girls don't, and boys also like sports, so many of the math questions relate to male-dominated sports like baseball and American football, which would have definitely alienated me if I was using this sort of educational software as a child. So here is a very concrete example of a pre-existing bias. This is a societal bias that has legal cases and maybe some regulations coming down the pipeline. The U.S. News and World Report is the most popular college ranking system in the United States. It has a ton of biases, some that we haven't gotten to yet, but we'll stick to the societal biases. It ranks colleges based on attributes considered elite in the 1980s. Basically, U.S. News decided that 1980s Harvard and Oxford were the models everyone else had to get as close to as possible to get a high ranking. Harvard self-reports that it had some challenges in the 80s. It was very white, with only 6% Black students and 4% Latino and 9% Asian Pacific Islander. 60% of the students did not receive any financial aid, so they were really wealthy. And one alumni recalls that 1980s Harvard was a sea of men, so there were not very many women faculty, staff, or students in Harvard in the 1980s. So 1980s Harvard had quite a few challenges, but that is what U.S. News has codified into their algorithm to decide how to rank colleges and universities. The US News and World Report have changed their algorithm slightly over the past decades, but Harvard is still ranked number 2, suggesting that the algorithm really hasn't changed significantly. Harvard is still up there. And that model still heavily influences where students want to attend college. Because these rankings are a main reason why students choose their colleges, the rankings come under a lot of legal scrutiny. Historically, lots of students sue their schools because of the rankings, because they believe that the rankings were wrong and then allege falsified data. Gretzer et al. Versus the Board of Regents for the University of Oklahoma is an example where a student sued their alma mater for an incorrect ranking. That's less about the societal bias, except that the students and the universities are working with a very flawed model. However, recently, as in 2018, Senators Cory Booker, Chris Coons, Brian Schatz, now Vice President Kamala Harris, Chris Murphy, and Tammy Baldwin wrote to US News and World Report asking the publisher to change their college rankings. They said that the college rankings needed to weigh the diversity of their student body and admittance of low-income students more heavily. Currently, diversity is not an element that the US News considers, and the admittance of Pell Grant recipients is only weighted at 2.5% as kind of an indicator of whether low-income students are admitted. On the other hand, ratings from peer institutions and research budgets are a whopping 40% of the ranking. The senators said that the US News college rankings codify and reproduce a system of wealth and exclusivity over and over, rather than a system of societal mobility and economic opportunity. No legislation has been passed yet concerning college rankings, but it has garnered government and political attention. That might mean that there could be something coming down the pipeline. We don't know yet.